Welcome to the second session on Psalms 1. We're exploring the wisdom psalm that is the doorway, the entrance into the kind of life that results in praise by the time you get to Psalm 150, through all the ups and downs and the emotion and the feelings of rejection and anger and wild delight and all those things that we experience as human beings. The Psalms highlight and address honestly. But the opening door is wisdom, and that's Psalms 1. And in Psalms 1, wisdom comes as a theme, like it does in other passages, as the metaphor of the way to walk, the road that we travel, the direction we're going, implies a destination, implies limitations on how you can travel and what you can carry and how far you can go in a day. And those kinds of things are all implied in the word way. The first psalm has uses the Hebrew word for way that comes over into the New Testament, and the early church are referred to as the people of the way. In Hebrew, it's derech or halakha, so that you have instructions on the way. The last verse in Psalms 1 says, "For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction," or nothingness, or instability. It leads to horrible consequences when people come to the way of the wicked, because it all goes up in smoke. It's not real. And so the way is captured in this psalm by two metaphors. The first is the metaphor of the way of the righteous, and that comes after verse 2, when he says, "Those whose delight is in the Torah of the Lord, and who meditates on his Torah day and night, that person is like a tree planted by the streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers." A tree, the metaphor of the person who's walking on the way with God, the way of the righteous, he says in verse 6. And so the question comes, how do we delight in Torah, the instruction? What we delight in, what we have a passion for, shapes our world. It shapes our response to people. It shapes our internal thought patterns. It shapes everything that we are. Where we give our heart, what we worship, shapes us. And the psalmist is well aware of that. If we delight in the Torah, we will meditate on it, he says, day and night. And that word meditation is a word that usually means recitation. It's speaking out loud, reading out loud, memorizing. A condensed version of this psalm is in Joshua 1, verse 8. Let me read it to you. "The book of Torah must not depart from your mouth. You are to meditate on it day and night, so that you may carefully observe everything written in it, for then you will prosper and succeed in whatever you do." See, that's the core of what the psalmist is talking about. But then he gives us a metaphor. He gives us a tree. So we have to ask the question, if we're going to meditate, and we meditate on the importance of what he says, how is a person who delights in the Torah and meditates on it, how are they like a tree? Or what qualities of a tree is seen in these kind of people? And that's an interesting question. I mean, when you begin to think about it, the tree stays put. It's well planted. It stays put where it's planted. And it's a source of life. It's planted by the streams of water. Now, that's unusual in Israel. There's only one river in Israel, and that's the River Jordan. That's the only stream of water that is always there. There are springs, of course, and oasis and that kind of thing. And so this tree stays close to the source of life. When it does, its leaf doesn't wither. It doesn't die. It's resilient. And it provides shade, which is a huge necessity in a wilderness environment. It provides shade of restoration for other people. It provides life because it is by the water, which is the biggest symbol of life in the Bible and in the culture of Israel. The second thing it does is it yields fruit. It's generative. It's not just focused on itself. It generates a fruit that is a support and a sustaining force in the lives of other people. It feeds and serves other people. But it's not just generative, it is regenerative. In other words, that fruit also produces a seed that takes root in other places, in other people. The third thing we see in the tree that we find in people who delight in the law or the Torah of God is that they're stable. They're well-rooted. No wind is going to blow them down. They stand in the storm. They not only produce, but they survive. They are firm. They're stable. And that's a technical term. It's a special term for rooted. They're not just rooted, they're well-rooted. And the fourth thing that he points out is whatever fruit they produce prospers. Whatever they do prospers. And it's kind of a vague term. It can also mean whatever they grow prospers in others. It prospers again. So that's kind of the generative, regenerative confirmation that's part of what the tree is. It takes nutriments from what is not a tree, water and soil and minerals, and creates bark and limbs and leaves and fruit. It takes things that are not part of its natural self and creates a life-sustaining force that benefits others over the years. It produces that thriving life in a community, or if we expand the metaphor, in a grove of trees, a forest of trees is produced around this well-planted tree. On the other hand, the metaphor for the wicked or those who are following the way of the wicked is chaff. Chaff is the little hull that is around a seed kernel of wheat that you have to throw up in the air. I mean, you tamp it down, you thresh it, you bring in the ox and you drag weights over it so that it cracks that off, and then you throw the straw and the chaff up in the air on a mountain or a hillside, and the wind carries off what's lightweight and not substantial, and you have left grain. Well, the grain is the smallest part of the plant that produced the grain. And so you have a lot of chaff, you have a lot of waste that you're cleaning, and that picture becomes a picture of judgment in the Old Testament. John the Baptist, for instance, says the Messiah's winnowing fork is in his hand. In other words, he's going to take people and throw them up in the air, and those that are chaff are going to be blown away, and those that are grain are going to be kept by the farmer because they have value. Well, what does chaff not have? Well, it doesn't stand in judgment, he says. The wicked don't stand in judgment. What does that mean? Well, let me give you a different picture. You walk in your kitchen in some places in this world, and you turn on the lights, and you hear this scattering noises. And those noises are cockroaches heading out. In other words, when the lights come on, the cockroaches head for cover. There's no substance to them. The threshing floor is the same way. There's a lack of value that is obvious to all. They're not welcome in the assembly of people who have value and weight and glory. So there's no kavod, there's no weight, glory, there's no substance to these people, and they do not stand up well under judgment. Well, come to think about it, Jesus uses parable of two ways to build a house on sand and on rock to sum up his Sermon on the Mount. He's been exposed, you see, to wisdom terminology and metaphors. And it's really important for us to understand that this is a place that we can go to meditate day and night on the pictures and on the substance of the pictures that express what really is going on behind the scenes in Psalm 1.